Welcome. Thank you for coming. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting on tonight, the Darug people, and acknowledge the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hope for Aboriginal Australia. I welcome any Aboriginal people here tonight. I'd just like to share a little story today that sort of illustrates that. I was, that's Jack. I was ordering my lunch today, and I was served by a Maori woman, and I also had noticed a Maori man sitting at a table, and she came out to clean up the tables, and she spoke to this fellow and asked, "Where are you from? Who are your people?" And, and I just saw how important country and culture and connection are for people. So, thank you. I'll introduce Mandy now.
It's my pleasure this evening to introduce Anne Wilson Schaef, who is an international speaker, consultant, seminar leader, author of many books, 13 of which have been published, and 15 now, several of those bestsellers. Anne is a Cherokee elder, and she brings much of native wisdom to her teachings. She's been coming to Australia for over 20 years to work with a group of us, of which we are very grateful for that. My own experience of Anne is a woman with a real immense capacity to love, and who's compassionate and wise, and has a great sense of humour. So speaking tonight on Living the New Paradigm, please welcome Anne Wilson Schaef.
It's my prerogative as a woman and a Cherokee to be late whenever I want to be late, and I didn't want to be late. Oh dear, this is really a good one. And we only got lost about 4 times coming here. And but before we got lost, Pete lost the keys, which he never does. And I had cleaned off the table where the keys were. And so being a codependent and 80 years old in a week or two, I just assumed I'd done it. And so felt very guilty about these keys that I'd never seen. And so we have been through every bit of the apartment, and I just ended up saying that I thought God didn't want me to be here. So I don't know who of you is going to try to get me tonight, but I just say, be nice, I'm old, and take pity on me. First of all, I'd like to know who you are. How many of you are involved in 12-step groups? Ooh. How many are professional helpers? Yes, I know, Malcolm, you help me all the time. And how many of you are especially interested in the new paradigm? Good. Okay. I took a nap today, and in the nap, I had an interesting thought, because I was giving you the speech in the nap. I don't know what I was saying, but I got to a point that said, "Is there anyone here I haven't offended yet?" And no hands went up. So what I'm going to do tonight is ask you to go on a journey with me. Because I'll be 80 here. I often celebrate my birthday in Australia. And this year I'm celebrating it in Australia and in Hawaii, because I'm flying out on my birthday and then I arrive the morning of my birthday. I love that, having 2 days of my birthday. And since I'll be 80, March 22nd, I'm in Aries cusp. Typical, I think. Anyway, I'm working on a book right now called Daily Reminders for Living a new paradigm. And what inspired me to work on this book is the books that I was reading on the new paradigm. And I was so offended by so many of them that I thought I would try to deal with what I think we're not getting, those of us who are interested in the new paradigm, so that we could actually, instead of thinking about a new paradigm, try to live it. Because I think it's very easy in this culture to think about something, because we're very handy with concepts. But that may be the old paradigm, okay? So what I want you to do is to just take a journey with me, because as I look at my own life, which is, long now, I can see turning points where I expanded to begin to see bigger and bigger pictures. And the place I went back to when I was thinking about this was when I was 7. And as it turns out, I did indeed grow up in a traditional Cherokee household. But as you can see, we could pass. And when I was born in 1934, it was not a good thing to be a Cherokee. And I would have been taken off to a boarding school and brainwashed. And my parents didn't want that, and so we passed for being white. So until I was in my 60s, I didn't know that I was a Cherokee. And I didn't know that I had different perceptions, because I was always surrounded by extended family. And I can remember when I went off to college and I wrote my parents a letter and I said, "You have not prepared me for this culture." And I had no idea what I was saying, but I knew that there was something. And so anyway, my great-grandmother was a medicine woman, and people came to her for treatment, medicine, healing. And my mother much preferred animals to people. She thought they were much more reliable. And so she tended to work with animals. And so I grew up with that. We always had stray people and stray animals around our house all the time. And at age 7, I announced, which seemed normal to me, that I was going to be a healer. And from that time on, I prepared to be a healer. And I really didn't know what that meant. I just knew I knew that was true. I knew it was true. The first word I got a hold of was psychiatrist. And at first I was going to be a doctor, and then I was known to be a psychiatrist. And I really didn't know what that meant either. But I took all the courses. And I went to college. And the preparation for pre-med in the U.S. is a bit different than it is in Australia. We have 4 years of general technology. We have 4 years of general science. I had 4 years of chemistry. I had physics. I had neurobiology, anatomy, bacteriology, comparative anatomy, zoology, English, classics, philosophy. I got it, the whole Monty, really. And when I finished those 4 years, I was then the appropriate thing to apply to medical school. And I got all the forms, and I physically, emotionally, and psychologically could not fill them out. I just couldn't do it. And it was quite a struggle for me at that point, and I had no idea why I couldn't do it. Every summer when I was, from the time I graduated from high school, those 4 years, I worked in the hospital. And since I was going to be a doctor, I got treated very special by the nuns and the staff. and I could sit in on surgeries, and I worked as a lab technician, and I worked as a special treatment nurse in a polio isolation when we had an epidemic. And I worked, had my own patients the last year I was there, and I did all their procedures, their Levine tubes and everything. And I loved it. I absolutely love it. On call every other night, on call every other weekend, loved it. And yet, I knew there was something wrong. That there was something wrong with that approach to healing. And I didn't know what it was. I had no words. But I think because of the way I was raised, I trusted my own intuition. And I trusted my process. That was my information system. It was my internal gyroscope. And when it started wobbling, I stepped back and said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. Which was not, as some of you know who have gone to graduate school, that was not a good move. But the dean called me in, and I was sure I was in trouble, because when the dean called you in, you were in trouble. And I didn't know which thing I'd done that she knew about. And so I was playing it very cool to let her speak first. And this is something you learn in college, how to deal with authority people, is you learn how to do that. And for example, our woman who worked in the dormitory was cross-eyed. And when we'd come in and we were too late from where we'd signed out, she would look us and she'd say, "You're in trouble." Well, of course, we couldn't tell who she was looking at. So we all stood there like rods until she said a name, because if you showed any sign, you were going to get in trouble, big trouble, So anyway, so I was waiting for her to tell me, and she said, I wanted to recommend you for this fellowship, the Stanforth Foundation Fellowship. And I said, oh, I know about that program. And she said, yes, it's for good Christian women, and it's sponsored by the Danforth Foundation. You're sent to a school 1,000 miles from where you went to school and where you went home, and you're to be of service to the campus and grow as a person. And I said, yes. And so I threw all the applications in the garbage, and I knew I would get that fellowship. And there were 660 girls interviewed and 16 chosen. And I had a year to be of service and to get clear. And after that year, I knew I couldn't go to medical school. And so I went to the psychology department and said, you really need me in this department. And they said, well, this is awfully late. I said, I know, but I think this is where I'm supposed to be. And so they said, okay, well, we'll accept you, which I thought was really interesting. And then I said, well, I need a fellowship to come. And they said, well, they've all been given out. And I said, we'll see. And they called me the next day and said, yeah, someone just returned one, and we'll give it to you. And for me, this is part of the new paradigm, is learning to trust the process of your life and not always try to control it or think you control it or think you know best, because you don't. So I was living that all this time. And then I did my graduate work in psychology, and I was a very good student and did very well. And then when I'd finished all my coursework, I said, there's something wrong with this. I can't do this. And the department was very upset with me, and I said, I'll just take some time off and see. And I became a psychotherapist. And I think I was pretty good at what I was doing. And I had a 2-year wait list for people who wanted to work with me, and people moved there to that city to work with me. And I was going great guns, loved my work. And after a few years, I said, there's something wrong with this system. I can't do this anymore. There's something wrong with the one-to-one. I have too much power. I don't know the answers for you. And if I'm supposed to professionally and legally, and I know that I shouldn't know the answers for you. I know that you know the answers for you, and we're just not getting there with this stuff that I've been taught. And so after struggling with that for many years, I left the field and developed the work that I do now with people, which I call living and process work. And I'll say more about that later. But again, I'm clear now that it came right out of my Cherokee heritage, right out of my other paradigm of living. Every step, as I look back. Now, of course, each time I didn't know it, but that it was coming out of something deeper than I was. And so, again, when I decided to close my practice, it took me 2 years to do it. And I was sure that my children would starve, I would lose my house and mortgage, I would, everything bad would happen. And the truth was my children were already in college, and I don't think there was much chance they were going to starve. But it was hard for me to let it go because I loved it. I love my patients, but I knew there was something wrong. There was something wrong with it. And so after I did that and started doing this other work, of course, I became more successful because I was doing what I knew was right for me to do. Made more money than I'd ever made, started writing books, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm telling you this because as I look at the work I've been doing with New Paradigm, to me, it's new and it's old. Because the reason I've titled this book Daily Reminders for Living a New Paradigm is because I believe that in our DNA, we know there's something different. And we may not be able to get our fingers on it or our brains around it, but we know that something's wrong with what we are doing as human beings on this planet right now. We know there's something wrong. And the reason I'm telling this story, because as I look at it, each juncture, my picture got bigger, and my picture got bigger, and my picture got bigger. And when I first started working with people, I was working with individuals. And I loved it. And the individual healing is absolutely necessary and really important. I've come to believe that as human beings, we're here to heal, to learn, and to grow, especially spiritually. I think it's very simple. It's very simple. That's why we're here. The Cherokee would add to be of service. And I believe that's part of healing and growing and learning. But then I worked with some of the greats. Virginia Satir and I were good friends. And she broadened me with her family therapy because suddenly you're not working just with an individual. You're working with an individual in context. And her context was the family. And that made so much sense to me. And Virginia and I had our differences, and we battled and talked. And I worked with Carl Rogers. I worked with Fritz Perls, Albert Ellis, you name it, I did it. I knew I was a psychologist looking for an answer. And that's what I think a lot of people who are in the helping professions do. They come to talks like this because they're looking for an answer. We know that what we're doing isn't what we really know can be done, and we don't know what's wrong. And I think that's good. I think that's really good. But what I began to see was where I started with the individual, and that's important, and it's always there. And then I started working only with families and individuals and couples. And then I went to groups, and I wouldn't work with any individuals when I left the field. I worked only in groups now. And then somewhere in that space, I discovered addictions. And I thought, boy, this is really interesting. And I realized that the worst people to work with addictions are doctors, psychologists, social workers, and therapists, because I had 3 hours in my doctoral training to work with addicts, 3 hours out of 4 years of classes, and no practicum. And I thought I knew what I was doing. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. And I just, what happened was I was living with a household full of women at that point. It was feminism, that's part of this. I really got into the feminist movement, and that was my first book, Women's Reality. And I was living with this household full of women, and all of a sudden I thought, I think that this woman is an alcoholic. Why does she always order another cocktail when we go out? You know, why does she seem crazy sometimes? Why is she like this? You know, and so I love to tell this story because I was so brave with this, because I had no idea what I was doing, of course. And she was coming out of the bathroom, or I was coming out of the bathroom, and she was coming in. So I felt like I had the upper hand at that point. And I said, I think you're an alcoholic. Terrific intervention, terrific. And she said, I think you're right. And I just stood there. I thought, my God, I don't know what to do next. So I went and called friends in Minnesota. We thought of Minnesota as the alcohol capital of the world at that point. And I said, what do I do now? And they said, you send her to treatment. And I said, okay, you go to treatment. And I said, you're going to treatment now. I had no control issues at all. And so she said, okay, which I thought was just great. And so I did, of course, I was professional. I did all the arrangements, of course. And have I said that I'm a codependent? I think the helping professions are institutionalized codependents. We get paid for being codependent. So anyway, I got her in treatment. And then they said, well, you're sick too. And I was so incensed with that. It was like, what? I'm earning the money. I own this house where we all live. I got her in treatment. I know what's... And I said, okay. I said, what do I need to do? And then they said, well, you need to go to treatment. I said, okay. And they said, in fact, your whole family needs to go to treatment because it's a contagious disease and you're all affected. And so I said, okay. So I said to my kids, you're going to treatment. And my son said, no, I'm not. And I said, oh, yes, you are. That's what we have to do. And I said, I'm a codependent. And so are you. So we're all going. And so then I said to the other women in the household, you're going to treatment too. And they said, okay, everybody thought that'd be good. And then I called my ex-husband and I said, I'm sure if I'm this, you're that. And so I said, I want you to come to treatment. And he said, okay. And then I thought, I better check with my secretary and her kids and see if they're willing to come. And so they decided they would come too. And then I thought, oh my God, my clients. And so we had 13 people, and no treatment center would take us. They said we were a flying wedge. And so we hired our own motel and our own staff, and they came and we went through our week of family therapy and our treatment for the family. And my son saying every few minutes, this is a bunch of bullshit. This is a bunch of bullshit. This is a bunch of bullshit. And later I said, well, what did you think of that? And he said, Mom, that was a bunch of crap. And he said, I don't know, he said a whole thing about childbirth order. He said, maybe I am a hero child. He said, Beth is obviously, I'm the second one. Maybe I'm a lost child. I'm probably a lost child. But I'm also an acting out child. He heard everything. He heard absolutely everything. And so then I launched into, I thought, well, wow, there is a lot more of this than we're admitting. And so I was giving a lot of speeches like that and being totally ignorant about, being anonymous and things like that. So we'd be at a banquet table, and I'd be there with usually mostly women. And I'd say, is anyone at this table an alcoholic? And then the hands would go up. I'd say, oh, aren't the rest of you not alcoholics? And another hand would go up. And so then I get speeches like this, and I'd say, okay, how many of you are alcoholics in this group? And the hands would go up. And I thought, there's an alcoholic under every chair. This is big. And so I really thought, I need to learn what this is about. And it seemed to me that the only thing that seemed to work, because I was clear that the professions were not doing a good job of this, and it was during this time that I was exploring this, that psychology and medicine said, ooh, there is money in this. And they became interested in alcoholism. They weren't before. But suddenly there's money in this. There's more of these people than we thought there were. And they're wanting some help. That sort of ticked me off, I have to say. So I decided that I was going to learn why the 12-step groups worked. And so, and I'm a good researcher, and I research all the time. So what I did was, with my yellow tablet, I started going to 12-step meetings. And I was going to observe and see why it worked. I almost died of smoke inhalation the first few months I went. I always tried to sit by a window. I think I'm still coughing from that period. But what I got, and this is really important in terms of a new paradigm, what I got was there was no way that I was ever going to know how that program worked unless I did it. It was not a program to observe. It was a program to work. And if I wanted to know, I had to get myself a sponsor, I had to work the steps, and I had to experience and participate what it was about. What that did for me is it made psychology irrelevant, because psychology was based on a theory of science and research, which is non-participation. And that was a big shift for me, a really, really big shift. And so in the work that I do now with people, I put my stuff out, as you can tell here. I do my deep process work, I do my recovery work, and I'm a participant in all the groups that I also facilitate. And first time I did that in Germany, I'll never forget, when I was in Germany. Germany is, I love the way different countries are, and I'm going to say a bit about that later, but in Germany, Germany is very authoritarian oriented, and you're the Die Führer, and that would be me, and that's the leader. And the first time I went to the mats and did my deep process work, the entire group sat at attention and didn't move until I came back from the mats, which was an hour. Now I see is one of the major keys for living a new paradigm. And the thing I see in a lot of the books that are being written about the new paradigm is it's all in the head and not in participating in something different. And that's very, very key for that. So anyway, I did that. Some of you may be familiar with my books, When Society Becomes an Addict. And what happened one day when I was giving a speech to about at least 1,000 people, it was in Minnesota, a lot of addicts in Minnesota. And the words came out of my mouth You know, if sometimes you say something and the words are there and you say, oh my God, can I stuff these back in, or should I, or what? And the words came out of my mouth. This society doesn't just support addictions. This society requires addictions in order to tolerate the society that we have created. It is that destructive. And then I said, this society is an addictive society. It has all the characteristics and processes of an active alcoholic. And that is so true. And there was just this silence, and then 1,000 people were on their feet applauding. And I said, it's true. It's true. Well, of course, what the media did with that is just said, well, if it's meaningless if everybody has it. Well, I said it's more meaningful if everybody has it, because these behaviors of dishonesty, self-centeredness, self-seeking, denial, these are embedded in the culture. And this is one of the reasons when people start recovery, why it's so difficult. Because everything around you invites you back into the disease. If you watch television, it's right there. If you watch the news, it's right there. If you watch a religious program, it's right there. Everything is inviting you back into that addictive thinking, that denial, that dishonesty. We are so accustomed to dishonesty at this point in this culture that we expect people to cheat us all the time. And it's so expected that if you don't, people don't trust you. It's true. Don't you think it's true? Yeah. And so this was really, really important to me, this phase. And I stayed with that, worked with the 12-step program, worked with my own recovery. I'm a recovering Al-Anon. My ex-husband brags that I'm a black belt Al-Anon. I'm not sure what that means. It means I divorced him. So that's good. So anyway, that was a phase for me. That was a phase. Just as going to be a doctor was a phase, becoming a psychologist was a phase, becoming a psychotherapist was a phase, then family therapy. In the meantime, I've had Native elders in my life who dropped these little pebbles in the spring of my soul. And of course, I'm leaving out a really important piece here, which I can't leave out. And that is, I was very active in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And that was very important to me. And I feel that as a woman, I am concerned, deeply concerned about everybody's civil rights. That is part of who I am as a woman. I'm not saying the men aren't. I'm just saying that's part of who I am as a woman. And it's been helped by having my own rights trampled on. But to me, justice and civil rights are part of my being. They're in my cells. And so there was no way I couldn't be active in the 60s in the civil rights movement, because I couldn't be honest to myself and not be involved. Well, of course, that pushed me right into the women's movement. And I think what we did in the 70s, in the early 80s, as women, is what a lot of you young women in the audience are walking on right now. Because that path we opened so you can do what you're doing now. So that we have the women commentators on the television, and we have a woman that might be president of the United States, and we have, and we did that. We did that. That consciousness raising was so important. But it was not just for us that we were doing it, and that's what I'm so clear on right now, because it was not just the women's issues. And that's why the terms feminism and women's movement are misnomers, because what we want is freedom and the rights of everybody. And it's not against men, it's not for men, it's just no more will we be defined by someone else. We define ourselves and who we are. And I think that this is absolutely essential for the new paradigm. Now, in the 70s, I made friends with her. I was invited to the home of a man named Frank Foolscrow. He was the spiritual, God bless you, Karen. He was the spiritual leader of the Lakota Sioux Indians. And in that, when I met him, he was in his 90s. And probably the most spiritual person I've ever met. And when I went to his house, he had invited me to come. And his first response was very similar to when I first came to Australia, the first time I was invited by a group of Aboriginal elders. And they both said to me, "What took you so long?" Which I think is really interesting. And I said, "Well," and he became my teacher and still is. And but one of the things he said to me just has recycled in me for years. And he said, there will be 1,000 years of peace and prosperity, and it will be ushered in by the women. And at the time, I thought, what is he talking about? Now think of this. This was in the 70s. What is he talking about? And it just keeps. And now I think it's going to be the leaders that know how to live this paradigm are going to be the women and the Native people throughout the world. Because it's in the genes. It's in the genes. It's in our blood. Our ancestors have prepared us for this. And that's why we're here. So, anyway, I began to, as I've worked with AA, which I have great respect for, I also saw, and this just came to me today, which I just love, because I thought, what am I going to say to these people? And I have great spooks and spirit guides, and they always know better what I need to say to these people than I do. So I just come and talk, and they sort of put the words out there. And I've just recently been kind of cycling around this. I just wrote a newsletter for the Living in Process Network, which I called something like, did Pete ever find his way here? What did I call it, Pete? Fraud AA style. And I think that the 12-step program is a great tool. But the 12-step program was developed by addicts for addicts. And it's great with dealing with addiction. But where I got to this fraud thing was so many of the people I know who are in AA, who are on step 9, 10, 11, 4, 5, somewhere down there, who have sponsees themselves, who are sponsors, are fraudulent. And I think the place is on step 1. And let me say, because we had this discussion recently with a friend of mine who's having anxiety attacks and another one who is extremely controlling. And step 1, when I first looked at step 1, that was during my feminist days, and it said, I am powerless. And I just lost it. I said, no way. I've spent all these years getting my power back. I'm not powerless. But what I did with that, which is different from what I see in a lot of people, is I said, can't say that. Can't do it. Can't feel it. And no, I won't. And I stuck with that for 2 years. Couldn't do step one. And I couldn't do the first 4 words of step one. And as I look back, I think that my Cherokee honesty and most Native people, being dishonest is spitting in the face of God. And you can't do it. You just can't do it. It's not that you're going to get caught. Nothing to do with that. It's just you can't do it. I can't do it for my soul. I just cannot. When someone accuses me of lying or being, I said, look, it's not about you, it's about me. I can't do this. So I could not say that and mean it until I meant it. And so I was 2 years on the I am powerless thing. And then I saw I am powerless over alcohol. And I said, oh, that's what addiction is. Well, I'm not an alcoholic, but I am powerless over my codependence. And I thought, I can say that because that's what an addiction is. It's something that has you in its grips. That's what an addiction is. It controls you. And then I looked at the second part of step one, and it said, and my life has become unmanageable. No way. It's chaotic. It's dysfunctional. It's not working, but I'm managing it. So it took me another 2 years on step one. And not once did I consider going to step 2, step 3, step 4. That would be fraudulent to me. And now I know that with people who actually know they're powerless, and I think there are very few of those people in AA, quite frankly, but people who really know they're powerless, sometimes they're going to forget that. That will happen. But it's the people who never know it that scare me. And then go on, sponsoring people, working the other steps, etc. But they never got powerlessness. And the rest of the 12-step program is built on powerlessness. Because if you don't think you are powerless over people, persons, and things, you're God. And that's a drunk. I don't care how long it's been since you've had a drink. That's a drunk. So this is what got me thinking about this for, this today. And then what I realized is that as a tool, AA is wonderful. It helps you deal with addiction. That's what it's for. That's what it does. But most people I know who are in AA and who've been there for a long time and doing the things think that's it. No. That's just one step along the way of your path. And if you're not drinking, that's great, or using in whatever way, but you're not finished. You're not finished. You can't lay back and say, okay, I'm retiring now from growing, healing, learning, because I'm not drinking. No. Anybody mad at me yet? I mean, in some circles, this is heresy. But for me, it's true that if you go on to step 2, when you really haven't gotten powerlessness, you're a fraud. And if you're sponsoring people, And if you keep going back to being not powerless, why aren't you saying, I'm not ready yet? Okay? So, but to me, the piece I got today was that this is very important because I think everybody who is in or affected by Western culture has been infected with the addictive process. That is the key process of the culture. And so you really need to do that recovery work, not specifically for the addiction only, but you need to do it for cultural healing. And the 12-step program can be your early door into a new paradigm. Because if you really do that, if you really do those steps, not just work at them and go through the motions, but if you really do those steps, you're going to start shifting paradigms. You're going to become honest. People are going to be very uncomfortable around you because you're going to become honest. That's one of the characteristics of living a new paradigm. Did you ever notice how honest Native people are? Maybe not when you're around, but when you're not. You know, they're honest about things. And so, again, I could see that in my own personal journey, it just gets bigger and bigger. From Virginia's family, I began to look at my culture and to see that we all exist in context. No one of us is an island. We all exist in context. Our context has affected us, and that's something we have to heal from. Now, for example, I work all over the world with people. I know people's insides all over the world. And cultures are different. And from each culture, you get cultural baggage that you have to heal from. And your particular culture has its own particular baggage. For example, I spent a lot of time in Germany. And the Germans have learned to forgive me for saying, oh, that is so German. But it is. I mean, the Germans have this thing with authority. They're terrified of authority. The Americans say authority, you know, the Australians do that too, kind of. But the Germans, don't breathe too much, don't. You know, it's just part of the culture. Don't be in touch with your feelings. Control things. The British, oh my God. The first time I did a living and process work shop in London, I couldn't believe it. You know, usually when I do workshops, people just can't wait to start telling their stories and putting things out and the big secrets. We sat there. And they all looked at me, and I said, who wants to share your story? Yeah. Who wants to feel something? Anybody here want to feel something? No, that's your heritage. Those British, that's your heritage. You know, so that we each have our own. And one of the things I just dealt with on the boat coming over here, is, which I'll share with you because I think it was really significant for me, is one person I'm very close to and love very much, and I confronted her with how much she hates Americans. And it was very painful for me because I don't hate Australians at all. But what she got to, what she came up with was, you know, it's sanctioned in Australia to hate Americans. Think about that. Sanctioned prejudice. You got to outgrow it. You know, no matter what it is you're hating in your prejudices, if you're going to live a new paradigm, you have to outgrow that. And at some point realize we're all the same. ultimately we're all the same part of the same creation. We're the same family. Everybody in here, to me, in this room, every one of you is family until you prove to me you aren't worthy to be my family member. That's the way I approach people. That's the way the Cherokee approach people. That's a given. And we have to learn that that's the way it is. Yeah. So we also have to heal from our cultures. And the Australians have something different than they have to heal from than the Americans. Not one of us, I know this may come as a terrible shock to some of you Australians, but you don't have a perfect culture, you know? And we don't either. We bumble along as best we can. But we don't have a perfect culture. And we have to learn from what's good in our cultures that we can share. One of the things all Native people I know say, it's like we're all climbing a mountain. And every one of us has a piece of the answer, whether it's religion, spirituality, culture, wisdom, and not one of us has the whole picture. Some religions teach that you do, but that's not true. And it's when we put it all together that we'll have more of the picture as we climb the mountain. But we're human beings. One of the great things about being human is that we make mistakes. One of my friends who is, what's his tribe, Pete? No, they're all guessing. I'm 80. You have to give me anything. No, he said the spiritual warrior makes 30 to 50. Don Coyes, Mohican. He's Mohican. He says the spiritual warrior makes 30 to 50 mistakes a day, consults with the Creator after every one, and moves on. There's not one of you in this room that doesn't need to make mistakes. You know, this whole perfectionism thing is part of the disease of addiction. You're not here to be perfect. You are here to learn. And you're going to make mistakes because they're your best avenue for learning. Every time I make a mistake, I think it's great. I giggle with it. I just think, wow. And when let me give you an example. I have a friend here who's an Australian doctor, and he didn't like at all what I came up with on this one because I was having this guy build me a little platform for my gazebo in Hawaii. And I am spatially challenged, which means that I'm an idiot when it comes to space. And so I've known this since high school, but I know that I had trouble, like on the intelligence test, I went over the top and everything, but these little things where you looked at one side and you're supposed to be able to know what the other side looked like, and I registered idiot, and I'd hold them, and I just couldn't see it. And in fact, my math teacher, I was his favorite student, and when I took solid geometry, I barely passed, and he wept. And I said, I cannot see this stuff. I just can't. And so anyway, my friend who's Hawaiian told me exactly what he was going to do, and I said, every time he talked to me, he really wanted me to get exactly what he was going to do. And every time he talked to me, all I wanted to do was scream, hold my head, and run. Just don't do this to me. And so then he built it, and what he built was like a dance platform that will be there for 100 years, and the gazebo will blow away, but that platform is going to be there. And it was horrible, and it cost me $2,000, and I thought it was going to be $500, And I said, how could you do this? And he said, I told you. And I thought, you did. And I couldn't get it. And I said, oh my God, I'm retarded. I'm spatially retarded. And I was so happy. And I went and I told this friend of mine, and he said, don't say that, you're not retarded. He just got really, he took it very personally. And I said, no, I am. That's the relief to know that I'm retarded in this area. I'm pretty sharp in some other things, but I'm really retarded in this area. I can't see space. And it's been great, like with my husband, my former husband, but he's really good on space. And he used to want to make me see this. And now all I have to say is, my brain is going to mush. And he stops, which is just great. So don't ask me. I'm great at decorating a room. I can see that. But I can't do the space thing, especially with building. And I have no idea what's inside those walls or what should be. And if I designed a house, which I did, my house in Arkansas, it had no closets and no stairs and no pantries or anything like that. Just those had to be stuck in later. So learning that we're not perfect, learning that we are idiots in certain areas is a relief to everybody. And not knowing everything means that we have the opportunity to learn something. You all know the Zen story, I'm sure, of the college professor who came to the Zen master and said, I want to learn from you. And the Zen master looked at him and he asked the student to bring him 2 cups and a pot of tea. And he put the cup in front of the college professor and he started pouring the pot, and it filled the cup and ran over on the table and kept flowing out. And finally the college professor said, stop, stop. It's too full. Nothing more can get in. And he said, and so it is with you. You have to empty before something can get in. We have to be not perfect before we can move toward knowing more. So learning these things, these are all a big thing. So where I am now with the new paradigm is that we have to look at, and then Fool's said this to me too. At one point, after he'd given me my name and my pipe to carry and all that, and this friend of mine said, well, I'll teach you all about herbs. And he said, no, don't bother her with that. And I thought to myself, Grandma already did that, But he said, no, her job is to heal systems and nations, not individuals anymore. And that's what it feels like to me now as we're talking about a new paradigm. So we need to learn to live it. We cannot think ourselves into a new paradigm. That is one of the problems, that we live in a paradigm now that is built of constructs, abstract constructs related to a mechanistic science. We have to learn to live the process. One of the things I see, like I just read a book on the new paradigm, and he knows exactly what it's going to look like. Well, I thought, that's really interesting, because I've been thinking about this for years, and I know other people have, and I have no idea. Because none of us does. None of us knows what that paradigm is going to look like. It's only as we participate, as we clean ourselves out, do our work, and we participate in a different way. It's only as women feel they have a voice, and they're not stupid when they're different, but they're willing enough to take that courage to say when they disagree, or to say what they think is important, or do what they say is important, is in the process will come up. Can you even imagine what a paradigm would be like if women and men were equal at every level? You can't even imagine that, because you don't know it yet. It's only going to happen as a process, as we participate together in becoming more honest, in speaking up, in building something new, in participating. If you're going to stand back and dream a new paradigm, you're not going to be much help. But if you're going to get in there and get your hands dirty, like these two did after the tsunami in Japan, the earthquake, they had to do something. So they brought some children who'd lost their parents from Japan over here to just be here in a different place, a safe place in nature, with people who wanted nothing from them except to give them a rest from the trauma that they'd experienced. That's a different paradigm. So, a paradigm, if we are able, one of the things that I think we have to do is we have to believe in process. You're not a thing. You're not a person. Your AA program is not a thing. It's a process. It's a process. You've got to recognize that as a process, you're going to be always changing. You're never going to get there. If you think you've got there, you're in trouble. You're never going to get there. The paradigm will always be changing. People 20 years ago who did the living in process work with me think they know it. It's changed. It changes all the time because it's living in process work. It's not the same. I used to sit by people and say, let that come, keep that, breathe, do all that stuff I learned in Gestalt. And then I thought, this is not my job. I don't have to do that. So it's always changing. We're always changing. We can't and shouldn't be trying to control that. We should be trying to participate in it and live it. Okay? Honesty is a big part of that. I now have a list of 31 things that I'm writing, and I think if we can participate in that, we'll live a new paradigm. But we'll never think ourselves into it, especially with our alcoholic brains, because it's not abstract. It's not an abstract thing. It's a living process thing. Okay, it's getting late. I know I was late. You want to make it? How many now are ready to kill me? No brave person there. Does this help at all? Is this what you came to hear? Or does it make any sense to you? Or do you have some questions? You want to make some comments? I had the fancy of getting all of you in a circle and we just talk about it. But I know some of you are tired and a couple of people had to leave. So, any questions? Any comments? Yes.
And I love the way you don't take yourself very seriously. I think that's beautiful. We don't hate Americans.
Only a fool would take his or herself seriously.
Yeah. We don't hate Americans. We hate Americanism. Different thing. Do you think you're...
Somehow it comes out personally sometimes.
Yeah, it's don't take it personally. Do you think you could be a reincarnation of your great-grandmother?
No, I think she's busy helping me.
Thank you.
I was always here before she died. I mean, we spent a lot of time together. I have a lot of help. One time when I met this world-famous psychic, and I just wanted to meet him, and he's very, I would say, not skilled at interpersonal relationships. And he kept saying, don't you want me to do a reading for you? Don't you want me? And I didn't go to, I just wanted to meet him. I go meet people all the time that I hear are interesting. And he said, you have a lot of support. And I said, well, I think I do. He said, well, I see you have 2,222 spirits that are with you all the time. And then you have others who jump in if you need more help. And that really is nice. That's really, and I believe we all do. He said everybody has at least 2 spirits that are with them all the time. And most people have more. And you have others who are there when you need them. And I feel like my grandmother, as Fool's Crow's on one shoulder and Grandma's on the other, all the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to say there? Yep.
Thank you, Anne. I love your books, and I just want to thank you for coming and speaking with us. I've recently learnt about the what's called, now it's gone out of my mind, the V-Day movement, the 1 Billion Rising movement that's happening in America in relation to women and violence. I imagine you know about that, and I've been looking on YouTube at the woman called Eve Ensler who started this.
I know about it.
And yeah, and it seems to me, I mean, I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing, and an awareness that's arising, you know, a movement saying the violence has to stop. It seems to me that's very much the new paradigm action starting, and, you know, the establishment of what's called the City of Joy in Africa to help the women and children and so on there that are survivors of terrible violence. Could you comment on that, or how you would see that as part of the paradigm,
Well,
or not?
I think there are going to be a million things. Thank you. I think there are going to be a million things that are happening, and I don't think it's going to be that organized. Maybe, you know, for the new paradigm, and that doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter. There is so much to do. You know, the earth is really hurting. Can I say this? Well, for me, what I did was I think about 18 years, I pulled back. And I quit giving speeches. And I quit doing any public stuff. And I just had to get to see where I was with all this, you know. And I think that my activism was great. And I needed to be really solid. And during that time is when I found out I was Cherokee. And that was a big thing for me. You know, I cried, I still do. It was a big thing. And I'm just coming back out. And so all of these things that are going on, it's really interesting, you know, because I was out hobnobbing with all the celebrities and all this when my first budget books came out. And now I don't know anybody. They're either dead or, you know, and so I'm having to rekindle some people to endorse my books and things like that. And my publishers are saying, but you haven't published anything. You know, you haven't sold any. My books keep selling, but you haven't sold 1 million, you know, last year. And I said, well, but I've sold 6 million. Does that count for anything? And so, you know, I'm still coming out. I'm not in movements right now. That's part of it. And I think people need to be. But they're also, it's going to be just as important what you do personally to change, whether you recycle everything you can, whether you quit eating so much meat. You know, everything now is going to count. I think everything, no matter what we do. But we can't bring in a new paradigm unless we're in the process of changing our paradigm of the way we live. To me, that's really important. And I think all of these things are good, but if you look, like we just went, we're in South America on the way over here, and what's being done to the land, and what's being done to the people, and what's being done to the birds, and you know, it's just as bad everywhere. And all of it is important, all of it. And put your energy where you're called to put your, not your head. Don't ever trust your head. But where you're called to put your energy. But don't think that that's more important than anything else. Because it's all important. It's all important. We're going to have to make such a change. I mean, we're talking here. See, at this point when I'm looking at, this is one of the things I want to tell you, Fool's Crush was him, and he said to me, you know, your work is with nations and systems. Don't worry so much about the individual people. And that's where I'm going now. I'm working on changing nature systems, but we have to look at the whole picture. We have to look at, right now where I am, is studying the trends of the human race since we appeared. Because the way I see it now is that we are a species in search of our identity. And we have really screwed up. You know, we have taken, if you step back. See, I keep stepping back from the personal to the family to the country to the system to nations and now I'm at the human race. That's where I am right now. And we've made so many mistakes and we've taken so many detours. This whole science, what we call science, Western science, mechanistic, reductionistic, it's killing the planet. It's absolutely killing the planet. And there are other kinds of sciences that we've had on this planet which are much more functional. That science tells us that if it can't measure and control and predict, then it doesn't exist. So my grandmother on my shoulder doesn't exist because I can't measure, control. That has limited us, and what it has done is created a static worldview because of the reductionism and the empiricism. We can't accept that science as reality anymore. I'm talking about changing everything, right now, everything, because we just can't accept it, you know. And what happens, and I think the reason I tripped on your question, is that we have let ourselves get distracted by the pieces and not kept our eye on the whole. And so I think we're in a place right now, if we're really going to make a difference, that we have to do these pieces like what these women are doing, but we have to see that the issue is that the human race is off track. The whole human race. And we have to do both and now. And women are better at doing that than men are. Men can see this or this. There's a lot of dualism. But the women can say, okay, we can see this problem, but you got to see that it's a lot bigger. And that's what I'm doing now. You got to see the human race, we're in big trouble. We're in big trouble. We're in big trouble spiritually, we're in big trouble. You know, things that we believed in, like economics and the material world, we're destroying the material world with our materialism. As a race, you know, we've made these junctures, these detours, like when we started farming, you know, and then we have the Industrial Revolution. We've made big switches in the past as a species, but the one we need to make now puts all of those to shame. And everything we do has to be seeing the small thing that needs to be done, but seeing that it's part of a whole new paradigm that we need to live out of and help others do that. And we need everybody. There's nobody overlooked in this one, you know. So, okay, don't spend your time hating Americanism even. Don't spend your time doing it because you get distracted. These differences in religion, they're distractions. They distract us away from spirituality. These nationalisms. Honestly, who thought of that? Look back and see when we started nation states. They didn't always exist. Money. Oh my God, what a problem that is. You know, the current monetary system we have right now is based on poverty and greed. If we don't have poverty and greed, our money system doesn't work. Do you know that? This is what we need to be looking at while we support the peace session. So I can't wait to see where I go next. You know, I think the human race is kind of it, but I'm only 80. I've got another 30 years to go, maybe. So anyway, thanks. Anybody else before we go? Want to say anything?
I wonder if you've ever heard of Murray Bowen.
Yes?
Yeah, because when, I've been a great learner of his theories and the things that you've talked about, and I've been reading you every single day of my life since 1995. So it's such a privilege.
Isn't she a gorgeous woman?
But it's the truth. I mean, that's, for me, you've been the part of my recovery, and that I was given your book in 1995, and I've never, ever not read it every single day. And so it's a great privilege to meet you in person. And I'm a patriotic Australian, I call myself, because I'm American, and I live here for 29 years now. And the Murray Bowen's theory is not well known, but what you're talking about, in my understanding of that theory, and I've studied it a lot, is differentiation of self. And that's the ability to tolerate the discomfort of others in being yourself, and to be able to tolerate anxiety and fear, and keep your voice and keep your values. And I think we struggle that because of the codependent society that we have. It's hard to stay being true to our values while everyone else isn't agreeing. And so as I hear you talk about becoming more differentiated as people, and then as a nation, and then as a culture, and then as a world. And if we can do that, then we can't destroy ourselves, each other, or the planets. So.
Yeah, I just get frightened when I hear theories, though.
I know, but he doesn't subscribe to his own theory. It's all about observation of a actual evolutionary culture, just of evolution, as an animal, it's just fascinating. Anyway, it fits with what I know from what you've been saying.
Okay,
so,
good.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. Okay, yep.
I don't really know what my question is, but I'm really interested in like Aboriginal spirituality, and like growing up I hear so much about spirits, and then when I'm around people that really believe it, I'm just like, yeah, I really believe that, but then there's the whole other world, it's like there's no proof sort of thing. So do you like, I don't know, I guess, do you believe, or like what is that for you sort of thing?
Well,
like, and with animals and totems and all that sort of stuff.
Well, my mother said to me when I was really little, maybe 3 or 4 years old, I have very good memory, and she said, remember, Elizabeth Ann, my first name's Elizabeth, she said, remember, Elizabeth Ann, it's the unseen and the unknown that's the most important. And I've always carried that, But see, we have a science that only knows how to, we call it the science, it's a science, that only knows how to deal with material world. And so way back 300 years ago, science and the church made a deal. And the deal was that the church would let this new Newtonian science alone if this Newtonian science left everything that had to do with the spirit alone. And so that's what we've grown up with, thinking that's reality. And that's just a very, very small piece of reality. But what that science says, if we can't measure and then manipulate and control and predict it, by definition, it doesn't exist. So if it doesn't fall into what our approach can deal with, it doesn't exist. And I can remember one time, and I really grew up in the sciences. My father was an engineer, and I took math and calculus in college to keep my grade point up, just for fun. And I had science. And I research all the time. Everything I do is research. But I remember one time, and I was in Boulder, Colorado, and I was standing, it was kind of a low point in my life, and I was looking at the stars, and I have no idea why this came to me, but I thought, people kept asking me questions, something like this, like, do you believe in reincarnation? And I thought, no, I know it. I know it. I don't have to believe. It's like, then you can not believe. I know it. I know it. And for me, it's like my experience. I know of other lives. I know it. That I've had. And I believe my experience. I'm not a nut. I believe my experience. I meet people and I know I already know them. I know it. And it seems to me that what Native people do is they have a firm grasp of the obvious. And what they know is there are forces in our lives that we can't see, we can't measure, we can't touch, we can't quantify. We can't reduce the world and then do it. But they know they're there. And one of the reasons we're so lopsided is because that whole part of Western culture that has to do with the unknowable and the unseen was given to the Christian church. And there's nothing wrong with the Christian church in terms of what Jesus taught. But the Christian church is run by people. And they're just as fallible as everybody else, you know. And they filtered out, before the Bible ever got made, they filtered out all the references to that other world that were in the other writings. If you're ever interested, I can tell you what to read, the earlier books. But see, what you're saying is, can I trust myself? And my experience is, I can. And sometimes I fool myself. But there are things I know. You've got a great book there, by the way. I said he has a great, this is my favorite book because it was all given to me by Native elders. And Mr. Kelly, who's Australian Aboriginal, when I first came to Australia, my first time, I was invited by the Aboriginal, and I didn't know I was a Cherokee at that point. But I was invited by a group, and I landed in Brisbane, and I had no idea why I'd been invited. And so I got there, and they said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "You invited me." And then they kept pounding me. They said, "Are you doing a doctoral thesis? Are you?" And I said, "No, I already have a doctorate. I don't need it." You know, and then they kept pounding me, and finally they said, "Well, you're here." Okay. And what took you so long? And I said, "Well, I was planning to come a couple of years ago, and I had an emergency appendectomy right at that time. And then I could get together because I hadn't been invited. I mean, I just was I wanted to visit Australia." And I said, "But I'm here now." And they said, "Oh, okay." And then they ignored me. They just ignored me. I don't, what kind of people are these, you know? And I listened. They just went ahead with their business, but they let me in on it. And I started crying, dripping. And then I started, "Ooh," and they just ignored me. And I sat there and cried through the whole session. And I thought, my God, I found some people who know what I know better than I know it. And I was so grateful. I was so grateful. And Mr. Kelly, one of the elders, said to me when I first came here, he said, "You know, Ann," he said, "you white folks have gone the way of science and technology, and it will destroy the planet." And he said, "We hope you figure that out before it's too late." And those words haunt me, and I think that's what I'm doing now, is trying to help us all figure it out, that this system that we've been taught is the way things are. It's getting almost too late. So trust yourself, kiddo. Get a copy of that book.
One more thing though.
Yeah. I didn't write that book. It was given to me. I just wrote down the words.
With like kids, I guess, come through now, like, how do you teach them to be mature or to listen to, like, not always
Do you want to tell me your own kids?
No, like, just generations come.
Oh, just generate. Get yourself clear. Get yourself clear.
But for me, like, how to honestly believe.
Well, I have really good intuition. I'll give you a couple examples. One of them is especially the husband way back, who's dead now. I went on a trip, and I had this dream. And in the dream, he and one of his clients were going to, he was a psychotherapist, a doctor in psychology. And in the dream, I was trying to find them in this complex of apartments. And he and one of his clients had gone to visit this woman client and one of her friends, and they were going to have a little sexual orgy. And I thought, So I'm in Oregon. He's in Colorado, 1,000 miles away. And I called him on the phone and I said, what were you doing last night? And he said, oh my God. And I said, don't you know that I know everything? He was doing just that. Her name in my dream was Mary Ann. Her name was Mary, mine's Ann. Now, I didn't trust that, but I did trust it. You know what I mean? And what I know is the more I trust my intuition, sometimes I'm wrong. But another time, I was running a men's workshop, and it was like the end of the workshop, and I started getting like anxious, like psychotic anxious. You know, I was like, and by the time I got 30-some miles, when I drove home, and I drove by this junction where that week one of my clients, was when I was still a therapist, her daughter had been killed by a drunken driver. And I was real shaken by it, as was she. And when I went by that corner, I just lost it. And by the time I got home, I was like this. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. And I thought, well, you're crazy. Look at you. And I just couldn't stop. And then I thought, oh, I went by that corner. So I stopped and I tuned in. And I said, what is it? What is it? And I thought, it's Marcia's daughter. So I called her. And Marcia's a nurse. She's very scientific. She doesn't. And I said, your daughter contacted me. And she wants you to know she's okay. And she wants you to not be so distressed. And she said, well, I don't believe in those things, but I appreciate you telling me. And I thought, okay, it's over. And a few minutes later, I'm walking the floor, wringing my hands, sweating, just carrying on like a psychotic. And I didn't know what in the world was going on. And I said, something is going to happen. I just kept, something's going to happen, something's going to happen, something's going to happen. And then I took one of the men who'd been participant in the workshop. I took him to the airport and was in the United Club. And the space shuttle blew up. And I screamed. And I said, that's it. And I said, my God, I knew it and I didn't do anything. And from that moment on, I said, you have to trust enough to check out everything. And now, I'm 80 years old, but now I trust everything I get. And the more I trust, the more I get of information. But it took me years. It took me years, and I was raised with it. You know, so don't be hard on yourself.
Does it come in, like, do you hear a voice or see an image?
No, I'm the psychic friend of mine. He told me one time, he said, I was having dinner last night with Siggy, and he really thinks you're great. And I said, really, David, was Siggy? Who? Siggy. And he said, Sigmund Freud. He said, He said, you know, the people are more interesting on the other side. I spend my time there. And he thinks you're really a knockout with the work you're doing, you know. And I said, well, I love that. But Siggy, you know, and I said, then I asked him the same question. He said, oh, we just visit. And I was so pissed. I said, why can't I hear a voice? That would be so nice, you know. But when I get, it's not that. It's like a knowing. For me, I would love to hear voices. I'd be more certifiable if I heard voices, but I would have loved to hear. But I did have an experience at our old place in Montana. It was haunted. And I knew that it was haunted. I had felt that it was haunted. And one time I was walking down the west wing, which has not been restored yet. And at the end of the hall, there was a room there. And I thought the door was open and there's a plate glass window. You know? And I looked down the hall, and that was one of the times when I was kind of, why don't I ever see anything? Or, you know, what? It's not fair. And I saw this woman. And she had on a white blouse and a long black skirt and long dark hair. And I thought, oh, I saw somebody. And so what I did, scientist that I was, I walked up and down that hallway to see if there was any way that was a reflection. You know, I checked it all out. But I had on a black top and white pants. She had a white top and black skirt. So I saw her. I got to see her. That's the only time. Otherwise, I have to work harder. Because I have to trust my knowing. But most people, you can ask the people in this room who work with me, they know that I see things in them. I pick up. And part of it is I just listen so intently, and I'm so open, and I'm so clear in myself that I pick up things in them that they don't realize they're doing. And then I give it back to them, and they learn from that and grow. Part of my job there. Okay? Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about trust as well.
Yeah.
Would you say that living in process, and I don't really understand that term as you use it much at all, but it's to me it sounds like you're talking about how important it is to, well, learn and grow. So it's all about change. Would you say that trust is a key to being able to follow this through? Trust in yourself or trust in spirit, it guides however you want to talk about it.
Yeah, you know, everything is so complex. The living process work to me very simply. It has three pieces. One is recovery from your addictions, so that you've got enough there to work with, because your addictions keep you so busy and screw up your head, etc., that you don't have a lot to work with. So, and I really feel that's a big part of it. The other is what I call the deep process work, and you know, I used to do Gestalt and all that, but all that was very controlled. And what I really think is that we have inside of us these deep processes. We have these memories, whether they're memories of our race, whether they're memories of our species, whether they're personal memories. But this is the wonderful thing about being a human being, that we have it all inside of us. We have all this memory. And that our inner being will feed to us what we're ready to work with and heal from, no matter what it is. And it's always at a feeling level. The doorway into our deep process is through our feelings and our emotions. And so we may get a feeling we don't know what it's all about. But in there, these deep processes, if we will go with them, they bypass our thinking mind. Yeah, it does. And it's good to have a group that you know to support you to do that. And so that deep process, it's amazing what we can hear from. And almost always it would never be anything that your conscious mind would come up with. It's always bypasses your conscious mind. And then the third piece is making a paradigm shift. Those are the three pieces, making a paradigm shift, changing your paradigm. So those are the three parts of what I call living in process. Okay? It takes a lot of trust, and if you don't trust, that's okay too. See, everything is okay. Because if you're not trusting, there's a reason. I mean, people who've been molested as children, sexually molested, they're not big on trust, you know? So not trusting is part of your process. So you can't say, okay, I'm going to will myself to trust so I can do this. You know, you're just, again, distorting yourself. So whatever it is, you work with it. And trust that. Trust your mistrust. Yeah. Okay. I think people are getting tired. I might be getting a little tired myself. Is there anything else? Thank you for coming out. Thank you for hanging in with me. Thank you for listening. And if you are interested in living process work, we have a great group here in Australia and a great group in New Zealand. You all want to stand up if anybody wants to talk to you about doing this work? Come on, team. These are all people that are doing this work here in New Zealand and Australia. We come down twice a year to work with them. Pete over here runs my life and loses car keys, which he did tonight, or house keys. And Pete and I work with the groups together. He's my manager and we work well together. Thank you all. Funeral when I came in.
Thanks, everyone. Books over there. If you want any more information about living in process, please ask any of us. And thanks for coming. Safe journey home.